Eyes forward, appendages off the floor, and absolutely no sudden movements. That includes oscillatory gland flaring, Zernax. Professor Kelkran's voice was crisp, if strained, echoing through the amphitheater-style lecture hall carved into the side of Gamma Academy's biosphere dome. Rows of seats climbed up in a crescent behind him, each filled with the finest and nerviest students from a dozen different planetary systems. From transparent-bodied Othari to the bark-armored Vrel, the class of intergalactic biology, 101, had gathered for what was billed as a first-hand demonstration in apex containment physiology. Some took notes, others trembled. And then, there was James. Human, mid-20s, exchange student from Earth. He was seated dead center, 3 rows back, legs spread like he owned the air in front of him, and munching on something that smelled unmistakably like dehydrated bacon. "Mr. James," Professor Kelkran said, pausing his lecture, "kindly cease consuming flesh-scented consumables during a predator module." James blinked, then glanced at the pouch in his hand. "Oh, sorry, just a snack." Several species in the row ahead began muttering nervously in their native tongues. The Thillian next to him shifted 3 feet away, using only her leg vents. "Apologies," James muttered, tucking the bag away. His fingers left a faint grease stain on his notes. The lights dimmed slightly, and the containment field at the center of the room pulsed to life. It shimmered, transparent yet dense, revealing the star of today's show. Model designation XR-42, Class 5 Apex Predator. It stood over 3 meters tall, built like a bunker on legs, 4 jaws layered over each other like a nightmare puzzle, muscle bands visible beneath carbon-woven plating. A tail with a serrated fin tip idly swished the reinforced floor. The students leaned forward. Some clutched translation tablets tighter. "This specimen," Professor Kelkran intoned, "was bioengineered for frontline shock deployment. It is fast, reactive, and typically unresponsive to pheromonal negotiation." XR-42 growled. The sound wasn't sonic, it was seismic. "And yet," the professor continued, "when immobilized via this level 4 stasis prism, we can safely examine muscle articulation and aggression-based biofeedback. Observe the pressure-sensitive scutes along the thoracic curve." An electric pop rang through the hall. Then another. And the response to minor stimuli. The lights above flickered. A pulse shivered across the containment field. "Wait, that's not." Professor Kelkran's tentacle shot toward the interface. "Control, respond. I'm registering a..." The field dropped. No sound, just sudden stillness, the kind that stretches time and air. Then XR-42 moved. Not lunging, not yet, but a slow, predatory step forward, jaws twitching open, the lower mandibles clicking with anatomical precision. A hiss escaped the venting panels. The creature sniffed the air. Then, chaos. Screams. Dozens of them. One student jumped 2 rows of seating backward in a single bound. Another tried scaling the wall and failed halfway, his suction pads squealing uselessly against the paneling. A gelatinous being turned entirely transparent and rolled under a bench. Professor Kelkran shouted for lockdown protocol, but the room didn't hear or care. The predator roared. A desk exploded under one swipe of its claw. James did not run. Instead, he slowly, carefully, slid his backpack from his shoulder and knelt. He set the bag beside him like he was preparing for a picnic. XR-42 was 20 feet away and closing. James made no move to flee. His voice was soft. "Easy, big guy. You got out early, huh?" The creature halted, its pupils adjusted. It sniffed again, deep, nasal, almost confused. James held out his palm. "You smell that? Bacon?" The beast made a grumbling noise. Then, bafflingly, it took a tentative step forward and lowered its head to sniff his hand. The rest of the room had gone silent, except for one lone security, Claxon still whooping like it, hadn't gotten the memo. James smiled. "Yeah, who's a good boy?" XR-42 rumbled, a noise that didn't match any recorded behavior profile. Then slowly, awkwardly, it flopped. Onto its side, exposing its massive belly, which looked like a muscular avalanche. James reached out. Can I? He asked softly. The thing snorted. So he rubbed. Belly. Full palm. Like a mechanic polishing the side of a tank. The predator purred. Holy, he's massaging the death beast, someone whispered behind him. Phones came out, recording lenses focused. James didn't notice. Or maybe he did, but was too occupied cooing softly. No, Bitey. That's right. Who's a snugglebug? You are. You totally are. It wiggled. A full-body shiver that sent tremors through the floor. Then the doors burst open. Security flooded in. 7 officers, armored and armed, weapons up. The lead barked, "Step away from the bioform." James, still calmly kneeling beside a murder engine with 4 jaws, looked up. "Could you not shout? He doesn't like yelling." The predator growled not at James, but at the guards. All 7 froze. Professor Kelkran, slumped against the wall and panting, lifted one eye stalk. I think I may be experiencing cardiac compression." The Thillian who'd shifted away from James earlier leaned over her desk and muttered, "He smells like prey, but the apex is treating him like littermate." Another student from the Othari delegation whispered, "Is this human mind control?" "No," said a shrill voice from the back. "I read about this. It's a ritual. Earthlings rub the abdominal segments of dominant beasts to assert emotional dominance." Someone else muttered, "We need to file a cultural incident report." James, still rubbing the purring slab of genetically engineered death beside him, raised one hand awkwardly. Does the Academy cover shredded backpack costs?" He kind of chewed mine. No one answered. The predator gave a happy grunt and licked James's arm. The tongue left a smear of saliva and what appeared to be mild, acidic etching on his shirt. James sighed. "Yeah, definitely ruined." The security chief lowered his weapon very, very slowly. "We're going to need a bioethics committee," he muttered. James squinted. "Also, could someone find my bottle of lotion? It fell out. Kinda smells like bacon, so that might be relevant." In the stunned silence, Professor Kelkran passed out. 3 hours later, the Intergalactic Academy's Department of Incident Containment and Cross-Species Protocols had commandeered Lecture Hall C in its entirety. The Predator XR-42 was snoozing in the corner like a warm bioreactive rug, still uncaged, resting its chin on what used to be a crash-resistant exam podium. A low hum of satisfied breathing rose and fell like an industrial air compressor. James sat in a folding chair across from a round table of increasingly concerned bureaucrats. A Kalshvek delegate blinked both sets of eyelids. "So you're saying you touched it because it reminded you of a pet?" James, wearing a loaned Academy emergency thermal hoodie and mismatched socks, nodded. "Specifically, my sister's mastiff. Huge guy, sweetheart, bit nervous around loud noises too." The Othari legal observer, whose body resembled a translucent jellyfish stuffed into a lab coat, quivered. "And your hand lotion, what is its function again?" "Moisturizing, and it smells like bacon. I use it out of habit." "Bacon is a pork product. From pigs." Half the room blanched. "Earthlings," whispered the Thillian ethics specialist, "you moisturize with carnivore residue?" James frowned. "I mean, not really. It's synthetic. But yeah, meat-scented stuff. Dogs love it. Works wonders on dry skin, especially when—" The Vrel delegate stood up suddenly. "We require a recess. This information is destabilizing." Professor Kelkran, now conscious and seated in a hover recliner with a blanket over his upper appendages, waved weakly. "Don't blame the human. Blame the field technicians who wired the prism containment through the Rec Lab's auxiliary panel. We had a popcorn machine surge last night. That fried the circuit junction." There was a long pause. The Yen security chief pinched the bridge of his proboscis. "The prism failed because of a snack dispenser?" "Yes." James blinked. "Wait, are you telling me this entire containment failure happened because someone wanted popcorn?" Silence. Kelkran muttered, "Cheddar flavor." James shook his head. "Unreal." The XR-42 snorted in its sleep, legs twitching. The Vrel returned to the table, now visibly anxious. "We demand a full psychological screening of this human. We cannot allow emotional contamination of classified bioforms. James raised an eyebrow. I didn't contaminate anything. I just didn't panic. You petted it. Yeah, worked, didn't it? The table erupted into overlapping arguments. Some shouted about weaponized empathy. Others demanded Earth restrict the export of emotionally conditioned mammals. A few insisted humans needed an official registry for all scent-based products. James sat back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. You know, he muttered, none of my advisors mentioned this might happen. A soft chime interrupted the chaos. A tall, lean figure walked into the room, an Earth delegate in formal blue with silver trim. Her hair was tied in a tight bun, and her expression was half exasperation, half bracing for impact. James Rayner? She asked. He stood. Yes, ma'am. She offered a hand. Monica Greer, Earth Council Liaison for Intergalactic Educational Integration. We need to talk. James looked at the committee. You guys done yelling? No, said the Othari. Cool, he muttered. Guess I'll step out anyway. The corridor outside was quiet. Cool, too clean. Monica walked beside James with clipped steps, tablet tucked under one arm. So, she said after a beat, that happened. James shrugged. It's not like I planned it. You belly rubbed a 600-kilo predator engineered to dismember armored units. I used to volunteer at a shelter. When something growls, you don't yell, you don't bolt, you de-escalate. Slowly, calm tone, ground-level posture. Monica stopped walking. You do realize the Galactic Council is considering labeling you a non-regulated biochemical influence vector. Catchy. They're trying to figure out if emotional manipulation via physical touch counts as low-grade telepathic warfare. James stared at her. Because I scratched his belly. You soothed a bioweapon with hand lotion and a soft voice. Yes. James rubbed his face. He looked stressed. What was I supposed to do? Tackle him? Monica sighed. No, that would have been worse. But this is triggering diplomatic panic. They've drafted a proposal to ban Earth comfort products on all scientific campuses. They think we're exporting empathy as a destabilizing influence. James snorted. That's ridiculous. It is, but you're not the one reading reports titled, Hugging as Subversive Warfare. Okay, that's ridiculous. Monica paused, then tapped her tablet. You're being temporarily reassigned. James blinked. To where? Public relations. You're the new student liaison for emotional threat de-escalation training. You'll sit in on predator modules, observe first response patterns, and… Rub more bellies? No. She rubbed her temples. Just be available for analysis. James thought for a moment. Do I get hazard pay? You get lunch vouchers and a replacement for your destroyed backpack. He looked at her. The creature drooled acid on my shirt. She nodded. We'll add a shirt to the voucher. 2 days later, XR-42 was officially reclassified. Not decommissioned. Not defanged. Just unusually responsive to human pheromone compounds and voice modulation. He was moved to a private enclosure adjacent to the Academy's xenopsychology wing. James was given a security pass and a set of reinforced gloves. His first official visit was supervised by 12 officers, 6 cameras, and an entire class of xenobiology interns taking notes behind a blast window. XR-42 saw him. Wiggled. Then flopped. James crouched, rubbed the spot behind the armored leg plates, and muttered, Who's my little apocalypse machine? You are. Yes, you are. The beast purred again. One intern fainted. Another scribbled, possibly Earth-based neural override protocol in their notes. That evening, James finally sat alone. On his bunk, hoodie off, just staring at his hand. The tremor he'd ignored during the interviews had crept back in. It wasn't dramatic, just a slight shake like his fingers were remembering what might have happened if XR-42 hadn't stopped. He breathed in. Out. Then, in a quiet voice meant for no one at all, he muttered, You don't get a second chance with something like that. His hand curled slightly. He reached for a water bottle, dropped it, swore softly, then got up, stretched, and whispered to the empty room, Right. Belly rubs and all. Tomorrow's another day. James stood just outside the XR-42 enclosure, tugging the stiff collar of his Academy-issued hazard jacket. The gloves weren't new anymore. 2 weeks of scheduled visits, training modules, and supervised demonstrations had given them that broken-in creak like a pair of favorite hiking boots. If those boots had once stroked the genetically armored belly of an apex predator. Inside the enclosure, XR-42 paced lazily, its heavy claws clacking across reinforced flooring. Motion sensors tracked every movement, feeding data into a dozen overlapping simulations, none of which had successfully explained why the creature now rolled over whenever James entered the room. James took a breath. He was tired. Not physically, though, the 6 a.m. behavioral debriefs weren't helping, but tired in the way people got when bureaucracy demanded they explain the unexplainable. The internal report count was up to 43. He'd signed off on incident response justification forms, interspecies behavioral analysis proposals, and a 3-page essay on potential biochemical anomalies in Earth mammal domestication rituals. It had taken him 40 minutes just to explain what a belly rub was. And still, every morning, he came in. Today's session wasn't normal, though. Today, the class was back. Not his original one. The students from Lecture Hall C were still on psychological leave, most of them voluntarily. But a new group, new species, fresh faces. All here for the Academy's updated Predator module, which now featured a section called Emotional Neutralization via Non-Threatening Posture, Human Case Study. And James was the case study. He stepped into the enclosure. The Predator turned, sniffed the air, and let out a soft, guttural chuff. James knelt. "Hey, big guy." The death beast ambled forward, leaned into the scratch with a deep, rumbling satisfaction, and collapsed at James's side, spine cracking audibly as it flopped. Through the thick blast window, 30 students watched in silence. Someone muttered, "That's not behavior, it's sorcery." Another took notes like their life depended on it. Elsewhere on campus, in a gray conference room with recycled oxygen and too many chairs, a very different group was meeting. Earth's delegation had arrived in full. 3 advisors, 1 diplomat, 1 cultural liaison, all fielding increasingly complicated questions from the Intergalactic Ethics Committee. The lead examiner was a Blinth historian who communicated through musical tones and short translated phrases. "Your species manipulates emotions with meat fragrance?" it asked through its translator. "No," Monica sighed. "That's just a side effect. The real mechanism is social conditioning, mutual trust building, and..." The Blinth made a sound like a harp string snapping. "We believe you are exporting affection as a weapon." Monica's mouth opened, then closed. Another delegate, this one from the Arthropodic Growl Confederation, tapped his claws together. "We reviewed footage. The predator nuzzles him. It shows submissive behavior." "Explain this." "He de-escalated it," Monica said. "Like you would de-escalate any panicking creature. It's not magic. It's emotional intelligence and body language. You reprogrammed the predator through petting." "We did not." James reacted instinctively. He used skills learned from domestic animals. The predator responded accordingly. The room fell silent. Then the Blinth asked, "How many domestic war beasts do humans keep in their homes?" "0, Monica offered. The Growl delegate turned a display screen toward them. "This is an Earth creature called a pit bull. It resembles XR 42 inches head shape and musculature. That's a dog. It says here, great with children." "Yes. And easily trained to hug." Monica pinched the bridge of her nose. "Okay, yes. Dogs can be very affectionate." The Blinth tone warbled. "We request immediate embargo on export of Earth canines and associated grooming products." James walked back to his dorm with a packet of leftover protein rolls in one hand and a fatigue that felt like it had roots in his spine. Someone had written "Death Beast Whisperer" in glowing marker on his door again. He didn't erase it, just stared at it. He dropped his bag, stripped off the jacket, and sat on the edge of the bed, breathing shallow. His fingers were sore, his shoulders ached. He'd never asked for this. He came here to learn, to study, not to become the face of cross-species emotional diplomacy. Still, he couldn't stop replaying the first moment XR-42 flopped over. Not the purr that came later, but the moment it chose to show its belly. Not submission. Trust. He hadn't known what it meant, not fully, not then. Now he did. And it terrified him. The next morning, something changed. James arrived at the enclosure as usual. XR-42 didn't flop. It stood, still, staring. James slowed his approach. "Hey, something wrong?" No response. The predator sniffed once, then turned away. James blinked. Behind the glass, a trainer frowned. Bioform is non-reactive. Behavioral deviation detected. Another scientist whispered, "Is it sick?" But James noticed something else. A faint, almost imperceptible scent. New. Different. He turned to the nearest technician. "Did someone else enter the enclosure before me today?" "Negative. Just the sanitation drone." James frowned. "Did it use a different cleaning agent?" Yes. New sterilizer compound. Floral base." His jaw tightened. "Get me some of the old stuff." 10 minutes later, James re-entered. Now wearing a fresh layer of bacon-scented lotion, XR-42 turned, sniffed, and immediately wiggled. James barely had time to crouch before the beast flopped like a brick of warm concrete. The class behind the glass murmured in shock. James let out a breath. Guess someone missed the good stuff. By that evening, an entire lab team was assigned to study the scent profile. They labeled it pheromonal analog response triggers in genetically aggressive fauna. James labeled it smelling nice. Either way, it worked. And as the third week closed out, XR-42 was no longer treated as an unsolvable mystery. He was an anomaly. A living example of what could happen when emotional intelligence outpaced aggression. And James? Well, James was still figuring it out. He wasn't sleeping much. He wasn't laughing. The videos of him rubbing the predator had gone viral in 3 quadrants. He'd gotten 6 marriage proposals. 2 were from species that didn't use skin. And yet he stayed. Because, no matter how absurd it all became, when XR-42 rolled over, exposing that terrifying armored belly, James saw the same look he'd once seen in the eyes of a terrified dog after a thunderstorm. A plea. For calm. For safety. For someone who wouldn't run. James sat in the center of the diplomatic chamber, arms crossed, eyes heavy. It was the same circular room where planetary embargoes were debated, where wars had been averted with careful words and ceremonial snacks. Now, it was filled with murmuring delegates, ethics representatives, and high-ranking officers from at least 17 species, all here because one apex predator had, inexplicably, started wagging its tail when a human said, "Who's a good boy?" XR-42 wasn't here, of course. He was snoozing in his upgraded enclosure, complete with radiant floor panels and an audio loop of James's voice reciting phrases like down, easy, and no, bitey. James had recorded those under duress. They'd been labeled vocal modulation examples. In front of him now, a Vrel scribe read from a large scroll with all the pomp of a royal sentencing. Section 44C of the Intergalactic Ethics Charter requires resolution of any classified event deemed to possess cross-cultural psychological risk. We are here to determine the final classification of the Human Rainer Protocol. James raised an eyebrow. It has a name now? Named after you, whispered Monica, seated beside him in the Earth delegation row. Could have at least called it the bacon rub principle, he muttered. The scroll continued. And to assess whether human interaction poses a long-term destabilizing influence on classified biofauna across the Academy's educational systems. The Yen security chief, still sour after 2 weeks of being proven irrelevant, leaned forward. Let the record show the bioform remains lethally dangerous to all non-human individuals. Except when they're not shouting, James said. Or running, or spritzed with bacon lotion. The Growl delegate chirped in. We do not find bacon lotion to be a stable control method. Neither did I, James muttered. But here we are. Professor Kelkran, now functioning at 75% mental clarity and 0% pride, stood to deliver the final academic recommendation. After exhaustive observation, cross-reference data, and 2 spilled sample trays, it is the Academy's conclusion that XR42 was not defective. He glanced at James. It was simply exposed to a human. Murmurs rippled through the room. Monica stood. Ladies and gentle beings, Earth does not condone weaponized affection. We didn't send James here to charm your war beasts. He was a student. He acted instinctively, responsibly, and most importantly, effectively. What happened with XR42 wasn't a strategy. It was empathy. And I think it's about time we stop treating that like a threat. She sat down. Silence. Then the blinth tone warbled again. We acknowledge Earth empathy is difficult to regulate, but not inherently hostile. The growl clacked. We propose the following compromise. XR42 remains under Earth human oversight. No further species to enter enclosure. Kelkran added, James Rayner will act as a temporary handler until a full ethological transition is complete. James blinked. Wait, what? Monica patted his shoulder. It's a symbolic title. Comes with a stipend and a spare keycard. He stared at her. He drooled acid on me. Only once. And I still don't have a new backpack. The voucher is processing. 3 days later, James returned to XR42's habitat with a reinforced satchel, a new pair of gloves, and a fatigue that was finally starting to lift. The beast met him at the gate, wiggled once, then flopped. James rubbed its side gently, voice low. Hey buddy, guess we're officially co-workers now. XR42 snorted contentedly. A voice buzzed over the intercom. Handler Rayner, please indicate response type. Positive, no aggression, standard bonding behavior. He glanced at the small console beside the door. A blinking light. Another scheduled observation. More data. He sighed. You know, he muttered to the beast, none of this makes sense. XR42 burped. James wiped his arm with the edge of his sleeve. Thanks, pal. He stood, gave the creature one last pat, and headed for the exit. Back at his dorm, the inbox was full again. More requests for interviews. Another policy draft involving emotional containment zones. One message, though, caught his eye. From a student on the Outer Ring campus. Saw the footage. We have a serpentine raptor here that no one can approach. Think you could help? We've got, like, tuna lotion or something? James smiled for the first time in weeks. He typed back. Tell it good boy and sit real still. I'll be there in the morning, and bring gloves. Final report summary. XR4, 2 Apex Class 5, has demonstrated uncharacteristic submission behavior in the presence of Earth-human subject James Rayner, now designated Handler Rayner under Provisional Academy Directive 39B. Exposure to Earth-derived scent compounds, notably those emulating cooked meat, appears to induce docility, though this effect is enhanced by subject's voice frequency, body language, and non-threatening posture. Behavioral override is not considered permanent or universal. However, targeted emotional interaction remains the most reliable de-escalation method recorded to date. Further testing recommended. Caution advised. Snacks optional. James closed the report,